All right, welcome back, folks. So, as you all continue to join in, I'm just going to go ahead and get started now. We've passed the halfway point of our training, and we're so glad to welcome you back for another day. To start us out today, we like to just take a moment to elevate any kind of questions you might have, or just hear from you all. So, if you'd like, you can utilize the chat or come off mute to share any questions that you may be mulling over. If you have a rhetorical question you want to just throw out there, go ahead and do it now. Or just, generally, how are you feeling about today's lineup? So I'm just going to take a moment to hear from you all. And yeah, go ahead and just share through the chat or come off mute. All right, eager to get started. So moving on to day 3, we're going to continue to our module deep dives into modules 3 and 4, and then wrapping it up with the conclusion. So throughout the day, you'll have time to connect with and brainstorm with your state training teams and hopefully earn some points along the way. So to take us into our first deep dive, we're going to pass it to Margot Hale of the National Center for Appropriate Technology. She's going to get us started for the day. So here's to you, Margot.
Thanks, Tomas. Good afternoon, I guess it is, for you all in the East Coast. My name is Margot Hale, and I am going to share my screen so we can get started on module 3. Okay, can you guys see that, hopefully? Yes, I see some head nods. All right. So I am Margot Hale, and I am NCAT's Southeast Regional Director based in Fayetteville, Arkansas. I am one of our agriculture specialists, and I do a lot of work with beginning farmers and military veterans. My background is in livestock production, so I've worked a lot with livestock producers. And for many years, I also was the state supervisor for the Food Corps Arkansas program. So in that role, I was able to do a lot of farm to school work all across the state and get to know lots of schools and child nutrition directors and see lots of really great farm to school programming in action. So that's a little bit about me. And I've been a part of this team since the very beginning and helped develop this curriculum and have worked on the curriculum and the guides and all of that you guys have been learning about and seeing. So I'm happy to be here today and talk you through module 3. So in the previous modules, you guys learned about, how producers learn to narrow down the marketing channels for their products. Yesterday, Robert talked about that, figuring out exactly how products are going to enter schools. And this module really helps producers have a better understanding of how their product fits into the plate and really determine the product or the types of products that are a good fit for selling to schools or selling to a particular school. This module also explores whether any product adaptation or kind of further value-added processing needs to happen and how producers can do that to meet the needs of the buyers. So you've seen this for the previous modules, but here is kind of the outline of module 3, and you can find it on page 65 of the Facilitator Guide. And then in the producer workbook, it's slightly different than the Facilitator Guide, but that's on page 26 of the producer workbook. And, the Facilitator Guide includes more details about this module, such as the in-depth training materials and suggested activities. This is the map, kind of the high-level overview of all of the content in Module 3. And you can find this on page 14 of your Facilitator Guide. And once again, you probably remember seeing this from the earlier modules. And you can refer to this map to help you get acquainted with the materials that are in your facilitator guide. That includes the activities and the worksheets. Those things, those activities and worksheets, they are also in the producer workbook, but they are in your facilitator guide. And we're going to go through these in this presentation about Module 3. As you can see, this module contains 2 sections. And so I'll give you an overview of those sections and the activities and the supplemental case studies. As was discussed yesterday, Module 2 talks about meeting with a school nutrition director and how that can help producers identify the types of products and the volume requirements that schools are most likely to purchase. In Module 3, Section A discusses school cooking infrastructure and how school district capacity, what types of programs they participate in, and just their specific needs influence what types of products producers can sell to the district. And then Section B helps producers think about moving their product from the field to the schools. And once again, if there's any processing that needs to happen, that is one component of Section B. And so really the main learning objectives for Module 3 are helping producers understand how their products can fit into school menus, helping them identify products and then the quantities that best fit whatever a particular school needs, and then identifying how products can be adapted to meet the needs of school buyers, and then explore product pricing and production cost. And really, we just mentioned this last point in Module 3 just a little bit. Module 4 goes into that much more in depth. So some background information for Module 3 can be found on page 65 and 66 of your facilitator guide. And this is those core concepts, some extra resources in that digging deeper section, and then a list of case studies and key terms. All right, so Section A of Module 3, we estimate that this module, if you were to give it, will take about 30 minutes. So after you introduce the general topic and flow of Module 3, you'll start discussing how to choose the right product based on the kitchen capacities of the district that producers are selling to. And some producers, one may already be selling to schools, which is great, and others may have products in mind. And so this is a good opportunity to, hear what producers in your audience, what they're already selling to schools, or what products that they think would be a good fit or that they might already have in mind. This is also a good time to tie in the concepts taught in modules 1 and 2. So just reminding them about the different types of programs and, kind of how school meals work. And then, what are the different ways we might get product into the schools? If working with a distributor or something like that is a possibility. So just reinforcing those concepts that you learned about from modules 1 and 2. So after you briefly discuss kitchen capacity and how to find a good product that fits based on capacity, this slide shows producers how easy it is to look at a district's menu and see if their product is a good fit. And usually school menus are pretty easy to find for most schools. You can find them on their website. And I think this is a really good starting point, especially if producers have never sold to a school, never considered selling to a school. I think looking at a school menu and seeing the types of products that are on that menu gives them a good idea of what they're growing or what they could grow and how that can fit into the menu. And, advise producers that using the menu is a really good place to start, because typically a school would prefer to directly substitute an item with a local item from their menu. So, I know most child nutrition directors aren't real interested in totally revamping their menu and switching all their products to some really cool new variety all across the board. They may be interested in doing that a little bit, but helping producers understand that, you know, to make it easy and a kind of a first stepping stone will be that direct substitution. So I'm helping them kind of understand what a school menu looks like. And this is a really good opportunity. There is a sample menu on the slide deck you'll have, but this is a good opportunity to bring in some local school menus from wherever you're at, wherever you're doing this producer training, to use those local menus as examples. The next couple of slides talk about volume requirement, which this definitely, I think, is, you know, kind of a sticking point. And I know Robert talked about yesterday, like helping producers speak the language of child nutrition directors. And this is definitely one of those areas where, you know, producers are thinking in how many pounds they're harvesting or how many cases of something. And child nutrition directors are thinking about servings and serving sizes. And so there's a couple of slides to help work through, you know, figuring out how we can translate that and helping producers, you know, not get too overwhelmed by thinking about the volume requirements. This is another great opportunity when having that discussion with a child nutrition director, you know, asking them to help translate some of their serving sizes. There are volume requirements based on the menu, and one of the resources that's listed is the USDA School Food Buying Guide. And there's an example of kind of doing this conversion. And thankfully, I'm not working you guys through a math problem converting this, but you can do that with your producers. And the USDA School Food Buying Guide is a great resource to help translate that. And also help producers think about, you know, are there other opportunities for smaller volumes? You know, you don't necessarily have to be able to produce enough carrots for every single serving for, you know, the whole menu for the year. You know, maybe there's going to be a taste test, or maybe it can be featured in one particular recipe or put on the salad bar, or, you know, maybe there's another opportunity where a single producer does not need to be responsible for a large volume. So once again, that's going to be a conversation with each individual school, but help your producers think about that. The next few slides talk about different types of cooking infrastructure and what might be available at schools, and really helping producers understand that a school's cooking infrastructure is really going to dictate what products that they can buy, and, you know, if they need to be in any certain form or if any further processing needs to happen. So once again, this is a conversation to learn what capacity a school has and what type of cooking that they're able to do. I do want to note, you know, we have a slide here showing salad bars, and salad bars in the past have been a great way for local producers to be able to get their product into schools. It's, you know, usually easy, and things can easily be substituted, and you know, volume isn't as important because, you know, use it until it's used up on the salad bar and move to something else. And I know that COVID-19, of course, impacted just about everything related to school meals, and salad bars definitely are one thing that got cut. So hopefully schools are starting to reintroduce salad bars, because I know that is a great opportunity, kind of one of those first stepping stones for a lot of producers to get local product into schools. In the next couple of slides, the slide 13 talks about how certain crops will require a continuous harvest, and others are a really good fit for the producer and schools if they have capacity, because they're one and done. So one harvest, we get everything, we can make one delivery to the school, and then the school can use it. But you have to understand if schools have capacity to do that. So in this picture, there are several pallets there of sweet potatoes. So that's a great opportunity for producers if you grow sweet potatoes, for example. One harvest, you deliver it, and then the school can use that throughout the season. If a school has storage capacity to be able to handle that. So once again, it's a great opportunity for producers if the school has capacity. So just kind of understanding a school's capacity and how that can dictate what products are a good fit. And then the final slide in the section just includes some tips for producers that are just about getting started in school sales and thinking through, maybe they have a product that isn't a good fit for a formal solicitation process. But maybe, like we mentioned earlier, maybe there's some other opportunities that they could take advantage of to get their product into school. So taste test or special events, classroom lessons, things like that. So, helping producers kind of think outside the box and not think that if they're going to sell to a school, it has to go into the cafeteria and, be a regular menu item. There's a lot of flexibility and a lot of ways we can get local products into schools. Okay, so slide 15 includes an excerpt from a full video case study from my friend Allie Marachek at Fayetteville Public Schools. And I'm going to show you this short clip. There is a longer video case study and a written case study from Fayetteville Public Schools that is included with your resources. So I'm going to stop sharing here.
Yeah, well, I would say number one, bring samples. You will have, a lot more luck with the child nutrition director when you bring them something tasty to eat, and also so you can showcase how different the flavor might be, or bring some different varieties that maybe they've never seen before. They're used to seeing that from their brokers, so to kind of align with that would be great. Also, come to the conversation knowing what you need for your farm operation. Just so that they can plan accordingly and you can decide together whether it's a good market for your operation. Mm-hmm. So probably the quickest and most simple explanation for how we manage purchasing relationships with growers is through a bid process, and the type of bidding you do depends on how much you're likely going to buy from the grower. But we have early conversations, and we are allowed to share previous pricing or current pricing with the grower so they can see if that pricing is something similar might work for their business, and then they can decide whether they participate in our bidding solicitation, all of that we're required to do. So you can have initial conversations about price before that happens. You can't tell them the price to put down, but it's just it's open information that anyone could request. And we primarily purchase directly from growers. We have a district warehouse that we can receive the items at, so the growers make one delivery, but we do very little local purchasing through a distributor or other sort of third party. It's direct from the producer.
Okay. So I am going to share back my presentation. Okay, So you can see from that, that example of hearing from Allie about a little bit about their district's capacities and how that can influence what products are a good fit for them and how they go through the purchasing process. So you can find that full case study in your resources and feel free to share that, or with any of these case studies that we feature, you know, if you have local examples, please use those in your trainings, those local examples, and hearing from those local producers and child nutrition directors and others in your area. Those are going to be most impactful for the producers that you're working with. So next in this module is an applied activity, and this is the school menu brainstorm. So thinking back to looking at that school menu, this activity, you're going to spend some time looking at school menus. So there are some examples of menus in the producer workbook that you can use for this activity. Or once again, please consider bringing a menu from your state or your region or locally, depending on, you know, where you're doing your training at. So plan on having producers spend about 10 minutes brainstorming what products might be a good fit or substitute for the menu items. So you can look at the menu items and identify products that they are already producing or could produce. And so they can jot those down. You can talk about them and share ideas. So the next section of Module 3 focuses on how producers can alter their products, if needed, to meet school cooking or processing limitations, or just to meet their needs, like we talked about in Section A. Trainers will help producers understand the different types of processing, from a raw product, for example, raw carrots, to light processing, such as carrot coins, to a high value added product, such as parboiled product or dried or frozen product. Another important point that we want you as trainers to be aware of is, you know, we know that processing infrastructure can be expensive to add to a farm. And so letting producers know that it might be a better option to connect with regional processing centers or other buyers to do that processing for the farmer. So, you know, we'll talk about value-added processing, but it's, you know, not always the best option for producers to actually do that processing themselves. But being familiar with what processing options are available in your region or your state will be really important to help connect those producers too. And then, you know, for those producers who are interested in investing in an infrastructure, there are a couple slides about financing and funding for those ventures. As someone who works with producers a whole lot, I know one of their first questions always is, are there grants for that? Where's the money for that? How can I finance that? So there's a little bit of information about those options. And then finally, the last section gets producers to start thinking about the cost of getting their farm product to the buyer. Once again, this is just a brief introduction to that topic, and Module 4 is going to go into that much more in depth. So in this section, you'll start off by reminding producers that school capacity will dictate the types of products and the level of processing required. Here's a good time to ask producers to think about the capacity discussion from Section A and how this might affect processing. So slides 19 and 20 discuss light processing, mainly of fruits and vegetables, and what that level of processing means exactly. So through an initial meeting with a child nutrition director, producers can ask about processing capacity and the cooking infrastructure at schools. So some schools might have the capacity to do a bit of light processing themselves in their kitchens. I know, for example, the Fayetteville Public Schools that was just featured, they do a lot of processing themselves. And so in the summer, they work that into their workload to process and freeze product to use throughout the school year. So some schools that might be an option, others it won't be. These next slides discuss processing for meat and other high value added products, such as pre-cooked fruits and vegetables. And these are the products that require extensive infrastructure and really are probably best left to a processing kitchen or a meat processor. So as trainers, it's going to be helpful to be familiar with state or regional examples of value added processing and financing. So if you know of those processing kitchens, or I know some universities have processing kitchens, maybe some communities, be familiar with what opportunities there are. And then producers will also likely have questions about processing rules and regulations, which those vary state to state and even, down to county and city, depending on some of the, the processing and health regulations and licenses and things like that. So just be familiar. These are questions that producers may have when we, talk about if you're going to do any sort of value added processing and what is allowed. There are lots of options for regionalization in the next few slides. So through regional processing kitchens in your area and farm to school grantees in your state that are using grants for processing. So find those examples and use those. And then finally mention to producers that adding value is not just through processing, and have them start thinking about how their products add value beyond processing. And we're going to have a little activity on this in a few minutes. But it's not just the actual processing of the product, but there are other things that they bring as a local farm that add value, and how think about how they can, explain that and convey that value to a school. The next slide also includes another short clip and a short excerpt from one of our case studies. I'm not going to play this one for you today, but this is Mr. Glenn Holmes, who has done a lot of farm to school work in the Southeast, and he shares some ideas about harvest time and storage capacity, kind of those logistics of getting products into schools, and the inevitable problem of we have lots of produce in the summer when our kids aren't in school. So just talking through some of those things. Really those are things that we have to consider and have to help our producers consider some of those timing aspects of products. And so, kind of putting the pieces together of what is a product that is a good fit for a school and how does that work in our production schedule. The next few slides walk producers through some of the costs to consider in doing even minimal processing. There is another producer spotlight that features meat processing. So feel free to play that case study if it's a fit for your audience and for the training that you're doing. And then finally, slide 30 features a list of potential grant and low interest loan funds for investing in infrastructure and processing capacity at a producer's farm. And note that this list of funding, funding opportunities is also in the producer workbook. So once again, if you work with producers, they're going to ask about the money. So that list is in there. There are a few other producer spotlight videos in this slide deck. And once again, You can, play all of them or pick the ones that are relevant to your audience, or if you have some local examples, use those. So the next applied activity is to give a values pitch. And we actually are going to do this. We are about to break you all up into just a few random groups and give everyone a chance to give a values pitch to their neighbor. So you can do this thinking as though you are thinking that you are a producer, and maybe we do have some producers here with us today, but if you aren't a producer, I'm sure you probably work with some or know some. So think about what it is that they would say. What are those values that they could express to a local school? So describe what makes your product better than the rest. So why would a school want to buy from you instead of buying off of their distributor truck? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I believe Carlos is going to break everyone into groups of probably, I think, 2 or 3. And I think we have, okay. Is everybody back from breakout room? Looks like everybody flew back. All right. Okay. So now here is your chance to earn some points. So I want to hear what you guys said, are the values pitch that your producers might give to a school. So you please either unmute yourself and share, that would be preferred, but also if you want to put it in the chat, what are some of those values that you said you're bringing to the table?
I'll hop in here. I was in a group with Ryan from up in Maine, and one of the big kind of values that I was hearing from him, and he's also a producer, is the availability of land up there. They have up in Aroostook County tons and tons of land, and growers of traditionally growing potatoes, they've lost a lot of their big contracts with like some of the big fry people and chip people, and they're starting to really move into some crop rotation with broccoli. And I was mentioning to him, I saw it in Hannaford's for 99 cents for the last 2 weeks, which is an incredible price and probably something that a school would love to hear. And they're really working towards connecting more with some simple processors that can help turn it into a value add or do some freezing or some minimal processing. And as he mentioned, it's only 3 hours away. And if they're able to aggregate from multiple farmers to make the volume worth it to take the drive to mass to do that, then it works out for them. Yeah.
Yeah, great. So you can connect to some farmers who maybe are a little bit outside your area, but still getting good local produce into your schools. Very good. Okay, I'm seeing lots of stuff in the chat. I'll read a few of these. Tammy, I guess you'll be keeping points. Food safety, traceability, many stays in the community. I think that's a huge important value to bring. Keeping regional farm infrastructure in place, absolutely. Quality product, food safety, fresher product, so that it tastes better, longer shelf life, all really good things. Local farms can deliver. Yeah, man, we've seen so many disruptions the past year and a half. It's just really, made us realize how important our very local food systems are and how those can keep functioning when some of our larger systems have had trouble. So very good. A reliable quality. Yes, and I like this: high quality products, variety of products such as grains and pulses. Yeah, thinking, I think we tend to think of fruits and vegetables when we think of, farm to school, but there are so many products that producers can grow and to get into our school menus. Fish to school, yes, and I know we'll be talking about that later, right, Tammy? That hasn't already happened. All right. Oh, did Jameson just steal points from Maine? I mean, I think maybe Tammy will have to give points to both. Yes, food safety, availability, reliable delivery, all of those things that a local producer can offer. So good job, everybody. Thank you for sharing. And I will share back my screen for the last few slides of this module. Okay, hopefully you guys can see that. So good work. So that's what you'll do with your producers, have them share with each other. And, you know, I'm sure it'll trigger some things and they'll be able to glean a few ideas from each other. The next few slides in this module get producers thinking about pricing their products. And this is a great time to help producers understand that, you know, there are lots of products that are a good fit for schools, but then there are a lot of products that aren't a good fit for schools. So typically products that have lower production cost are going to be a better fit for schools. And so really helping them think through what those products are and you know, how they can fit into the school menu. There is a lot more information on this topic in module 4, really helping producers understand, you know, what is their production costs and helping them identify, you know, those potential products that would be a good fit or not a good fit. So I think Ali said it in her case study in her video, in the longer one. I don't think you guys have seen this, but you know, she says helping producers understand like not every product is going to be a good fit for farm to school. And so really helping them, you know, narrow it down and find those few that are a good option. The final activity in module 3 is modeled after the Washington Department of Agriculture product planning chart. And you'll find this on page 32 of the producer workbook. And this worksheet prompts producers to think about kind of that process of moving their product to the school. So, you know, helping identify, you know, what is the need of the school, you know, what need is your product going to meet, and how are you going to get that into the school? You know, does it need any further processing? And what are those steps that you need to take? This slide has producers look at case studies of farmers selling through the different channels described in this module. Once again, please use these case studies, you know, review them before a training and find the ones that are going to be the best fit for your audience. And as always, if you have local examples, use those. Finally, the action planning check-in is for trainers to review and ask producers to reflect on those essential questions related to product development. So for module 3, the check-in questions are on page 55 of the Facilitator guide. And for this module, those questions are, you know, have producers identified the product or a set of products that will work for school sales? Do these products need to be processed in any way to meet school demand? And if so, how is that going to happen? And then finally, ensure that producers understand how to find the tools to understand the cost of production, which once again, it's going to be expanded on in module 4. So they won't have all the tools yet just by this module, but they'll learn more in module 4. So throughout this presentation, or throughout module 3, there are many opportunities to regionalize the content and make it really applicable for your, you know, local producers. Once again, think about using the local school menus, find pictures and local pictures, you know, hear from local child nutrition directors to find out about school capacity in your own region. And then think about the farm to school grantees in your state or in your region to elevate those examples and feature them in panels. And then consider doing your own case studies, or you know, having local producers who've sold into schools have them come in and share their experiences. Okay, so that is it for module 3. I'm happy to answer any questions there may be. And if not, you can always contact me or Tammy or the rest of our team if you have questions. All right, well, thanks everyone. And Tomas, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thanks, Margot. And yeah, if you have any questions for Margot, feel free to share them in the chat or come off mute now. You can also just reach out to her. I think she shared her contact information there. And so you can also just reach out to Tammy and I for questions, and we can pull in Margot as needed. But if there's no questions at this point, we're going to move on into our first breakout group for the day. So Carl, so get that started, and the kind of the prompt for this breakout room is to think about producer needs and how those needs can be incorporated in the training agenda that you'll be building.
Okay, I think we're good to go, Andy.
All right, well, thank you, Tammy, and hello, everyone. It's great to be with you today, and I hope you are enjoying the training so far. As Tammy mentioned, my name is Andy Pressman, and I am NCAT's Northeast Regional Director, located in Keene, New Hampshire. And I have the pleasure of introducing you all to Module 4 of the curriculum. And this module focuses on the planning and production aspects of selling to schools, which, as you know, is critical for success and in managing through challenges, as we've seen with the pandemic, as well as with the overwhelming amount of rain the Northeast experienced this summer. In my area, we saw a 300% increase in rain this summer from the average rainfall. And on my farm, just outside of Keene, we measured 30 inches of rain in just July and August alone, which the average is typically about 8.6 inches. So through my work with NCAT, I have the privilege of working with producers who sell to schools. And much of my work involves working with producers to help them evaluate and plan for scaling up production in order to sell to schools and other direct and non-direct to consumer markets. This includes whole farm planning, which was introduced to you all on Monday, as well as production planning and understanding the relationships between farm equipment and infrastructure and current and future scales of production. This is all part of the foundation of Module 4. It's a big module, and I only have about 50 minutes to dive into it. So as we get started, keep in mind that several of the topics included in this module may work better for you and your producers being taught as standalone trainings. So Module 4 contains the business and production planning portion of this training, as Tammy had mentioned. And I understand that some of you are still waiting for your facilitator and producer workbooks to arrive. So I may slow down a little bit just so for those of you that don't have these materials yet can sort of glance over the slides. But for those of you that do have your materials, we're starting on page 79 of your facilitator guide and the producer version on page 33 of the producer workbook. So Module 4 focuses on whole farm business planning, considerations for scaling up for school markets, crop and livestock planning and production, and food safety considerations and regulations. There are a lot of tools and resources identified in this module to help producers evaluate school markets and whether or not schools are a good fit for their farms. And as such, it's important for you to consider your producer training teams. If your team is strong on, let's say, the procurement side, but perhaps not as experienced on training producers on the principles of business and financial management, you may need to pull in someone who is skilled at teaching these topic areas. This goes for food safety as well. So for those of you that have your resources, you can turn to page 15 and 16 of your facilitator guide, which is also on the screen. As with all the training modules, you can use these outlines to get a quick glance at the core content and concepts for each module, learning objectives, and training activities to help producers reinforce the information. You can see in column 4 that this module is heavy on applied activities that include worksheets in the producer workbook and in familiarizing and utilizing several online resources. And so the learning objectives for module 4 are listed on your screen. Here we want farmers to understand and assess their capacity for school sales. We want to further explore price point and return on investment. We want them to understand some of the infrastructure that might be required for certain school districts and to understand how to plan and move the product basically from the field to the cafeteria. And for those of you who have your resources, you can also turn to page 80 in your facilitator guide, which will contain this list of core concepts included in this module, which are also listed on the screen. The core concepts align with the producer learning objectives and include business, financial, and production planning, as well as food safety, all through the filter of school sales. There are a lot of resources on production planning and enterprise analysis. So we encourage you to take a look at these and perhaps find state-specific resources if available. The resources that we have included are embedded links in Appendix A and here on page 80 of the facilitator guide. So unless anyone has any questions, we can dive into section A of module 4. Everyone all set? All right, so section A is the business planning for school sales section. It's intended to help producers understand if selling to schools is a good choice for their farm business and their family and farm goals. It reviews the whole farm planning process of selling to schools that was presented on Monday in the introduction, to which we want to encourage producers to work within their enterprises and markets that support not only their desired financial and business decisions, but as well as their desired quality of life and holistic goals. So selling to school markets requires producers to be proactive in their planning and to understand their costs of production. If things don't look profitable on paper in the planning process, then there's a good chance that it won't be if and when it is implemented. And so we'll be reviewing a few tools to assist producers in this decision-making process throughout this module. All right, so starting off on page 82 of the facilitator guide is slide 5. And this is just a review and another prompt for producers to review the factors that affect how a product fits into a school menu and to gauge if their goals still align with this based on what they've learned so far. This includes things like evaluating price points, different marketing channels, and whether or not school markets work well for a producer's personality, interests, or business mission, and their current or future systems of production. So next we have slides 6 through 9, and these slides focus on business planning and financial tools for producers. And here we want to help producers understand how to calculate things like the break-even price for their products and return on investment when accessing school markets. I'd like to highlight that this is especially important if changes to systems and infrastructure are needed. There are numerous models and software programs available for producers to help them with business and financial planning and record keeping, many of which we've identified in the workbooks and online as well. But many producers should already have some idea of this, but this will give them an opportunity to develop a clear understanding of production costs, their break-even price point, and the time frame for the return on investment, or ROI. This information can also be used in creating a cash flow statement, which is critical for farms to align their monthly expenses and gross sales with the school year or school's payment terms. These slides and the corresponding producer workbook on page 35 again include a series of resources to help make these calculations. And on slide 10, we have one of our first case studies for this module. And this one is with Katrina Becker of Cattail Organics, which is located in Wisconsin. And this is an excerpt from a podcast. And while it's not the greatest audio quality, Katrina shares some great insight into price point. She mentions in the podcast that they first considered trying to compensate distributors on or compete with distributors on their pricing, but they've since moved away from the strategy as a result of good record keeping on cost of production and understanding the profitability of each crop grown on their farm. The farm's prices would be considered high by wholesale standards. However, Kat mentions in the podcast that the food service directors are happy to pay more because there's less waste. Lettuce is a good example of this. Within the podcast, she mentions that they sell baby lettuce mix at $7 a pound, but virtually none of the product is thrown away. The food service director that she works with has said that they can expect to throw away anywhere from 1/3 to 2/3 of the product from a distributor. So as such, Kat suggests that this is something to consider when trying to distinguish a farm's products from products that the food service director currently purchases from a distributor. And this is followed by an applied activity that should roughly take about 15 minutes. And here we want producers to work in groups with similar enterprises to use some of the tools linked in the presentation in order to help find their cost of production and break-even price for specific enterprises. So keep in mind that scale of production plays a vital role in figuring out cost of production and in meeting a school's volume requirements. With more time, producers can do a deeper dive into things like labor costs and whether the farm is at a scale that can take advantage of wholesale prices and purchasing inputs for production, such as seed costs, fertilizer and soil amendments, and livestock feed, all of which can have a significant impact on a farm's operating expenses. And so now on your screen is how the worksheet looks in the producer workbook, which is on page 36. As I just mentioned, we're diving into things like fixed and variable costs. So if any producers seem overwhelmed, it may be good to remind them that developing enterprise or crop or livestock budgets can be challenging and may take several years to develop, especially with multiple enterprises or crops. This is why record keeping is so critical. Also, in regards to planning costs, I want to mention that there are always unexpected costs that are usually not considered in developing a budget. I encourage you all to help point out that these costs should be included in the overall operating budget. A lot of farmers consider this as a contingency line item, which is often a percentage of the overall operating costs. And frequently we see this as around 20%. So they can take their total operating costs and then add an additional 20% onto that. Or I've also seen it where farmers will take the purchasing price of a piece of equipment or infrastructure and add on a certain percentage each year to their operating budget to help cover costs that they just don't expect in terms of maintenance or anything related to that. So if I, for example, am interested in buying a $20,000 greenhouse, I may take 10% of that $2,000 per year, add that in addition to my overall operating expenses just to cover the yearly maintenance and things that we just don't expect for. All right, so that completes the first section of module 4. And as we move on to the next sections, keep in mind that these sections could be used for a separate training and to really do a deep dive into these topics, depending on the audience. So we're going to start off with section B, which focuses on scaling up production for school markets. And here is slide 13 and 14. And we discuss how different market channels will affect the scale needed to meet the demand of the market, and how important it is to ensure the farm is solid in its production skills before scaling up to school sales. One way to do this is by evaluating the weakest link that is preventing the farm from succeeding or managing towards its goals. This is an opportunity to dive into the root of a problem. Most often when we think about the goal, it is a financial goal that a farm is targeting and managing towards. There's a saying you may be familiar with, farm for profit, not for production. And as you know, farmers are constantly battling things that impact how they manage towards their targeted revenues. Most of the challenges can be mitigated so that production is still happening. However, the weakest link is more about the one thing that until it is addressed, a farm cannot move forward. This is really important to understanding the relationship between scales of production and selling to schools. And we'll discuss this a bit more in a few minutes as we have an applied activity at the end of this section that is designed to help producers evaluate their weak links. All right, next up are slides 15 through 17. And here you're going to help producers understand some of the factors that can lead to success, or on the opposite end, some heartburn when scaling up to sell to schools. Certainly labor is an important consideration and one of the biggest expenses for a farm business. So you may want to spend a little extra time on this and perhaps consider adding in an extra slide and some discussion around your state labor laws. I'd also like to add that as educators and technical service providers, we like to stress that a farm or any business should be profitable where they are currently at before considering scaling up. However, in my experience in working with farmers, I find that most of them scale up in order to manage towards profitability. Unfortunately, many don't survive. But for those that do, they tend to understand their goals and they have some type of business plan that not only details the financials of the business, but it's also designed to work as a filter for making business decisions, especially when considering scaling up. Also note that on slide 16, which is in the upper right-hand corner there with the chickens, there are 4 components listed for scaling up that define it, not just in terms of increased acreage, but perhaps herd size, number of farm enterprises, number of markets, and one that is not listed there is just being more efficient and better within a farm's current systems that will in turn increase yields and increase profitability. This may not just be production related, but perhaps doing a better job at record keeping, for payroll, or setting up an appropriate channels for communications within your staff and labor. And next up are slides 18 through 20, and these focus on school-specific considerations for scaling up, including school requirements for consistency and quality, and in how items are prepared and packaged and labeled. These considerations are so important for successful relationships in farm to school, while I also want to stress the importance of having clear communication channels between all parties. This may require certain systems be in place for communicating these aspects, but I'm not just talking about communication in terms of what is available, how to place an order, and setting up the deliveries, but more importantly for things like traceability, and in the unfortunate situation of a possible recall on a product where someone may have gotten sick. Slides 21 through 22 focus on the risk of scaling up and including managing federal food safety requirements, which we'll talk about here in a few minutes. If the farmers move beyond the allowed exemptions and in meeting school liability insurance requirements. I would add that risk management should also be included in the farm's business plan. This is a proactive approach versus being reactive when certain issues arise. Other components that I would consider under risk management in a business plan include dealing with climate change and the impacts it may have on yields, including bumper crops, not just crop losses, as well as what happens to the farm in the case that it doesn't survive. The latter is directly related to the type of business the farm is structured under, such as a sole proprietorship or LLC. And as we wrap up this section, it's important to remind producers that scaling up requires careful cost calculations in order to understand the rate of return and to see if it pencils out. It may be valuable to have a conversation about scaling up for multiple wholesale or intermediary market channels, not just for school sales. And there may be other trainings out there that you may want to look into, such as Wholesale Success, which is conducted by Atina Diffley and the Family Farmed organization that may support this type of information and your needs. So getting to the applied activity and going back to sort of the discussion on weak links, this is worksheet 4B on page 39 of the producer workbook. And as I previously stated, the goal for a producer is to identify the one and only one weak link on their farm that is holding them back in their current or future production for school sales. All the other challenges or barriers that a producer identifies, we can consider as adverse factors And while they are problems, they can be addressed while still working within school markets. This is also an opportunity to stress the importance for producers to monitor their decisions and progress throughout the season. This can allow for any quick in-season adjustments that may be needed and to not jeopardize the contract a producer has with the school. So think about how producers who had school contracts at the start of COVID had to adapt to help meet their targeted revenue. So one thing I want to point out here is just the quote from Alan Savory, who's one of the pioneers in holistic management. So to sort of better explain this is the one and only one weakest link accounts for the strength of the entire chain, regardless of how strong other links might be. To strengthen a chain, one must always attend first to the weakest link. Other links, or the adverse factors, no matter how frail they appear, are essentially non-problems until the weakest link is first fixed. So I'd like to take a few moments for you all to think about and write down some weak links that either you have experienced in working with a producer who is already selling to schools, or that could be a future weak link as they seek out school markets. So let's take a minute here or so and feel free to jot down some of your thoughts. All right, hopefully that was enough time to give you to jot a few things down. And Tammy, I don't know how the point system is working, but maybe this can increase someone's total. If anyone would like to put in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourselves if you want to share what you've come up with as a potential weak link or one that you've experienced in working with producers.
I got my pencil at the ready, so.
I see lack of knowledge of procurement. Okay. FSMA compliance from Caitlin. Any others? Lack of space, volume from Jameson. All right, well, there's a few other in the chat as well. And I appreciate for those of you who have shared. I just want to point out that what one person has identified as a weak link could be an adverse factor for someone else. So it just depends on your situation and how it affects your moving forward. All right. So that is section B. And we're going to move on to section C now. And section C focuses on crop planning. And obviously it should be used if you have an audience comprised of crop producers. The next section, section D, is geared towards livestock producers. So we encourage you to pick and choose these parts of the curriculum based on the types of producers you are working with at your trainings. And if you have a composition of both, consider breaking out into groups by enterprise type, which could help strengthen peer-to-peer learning. So the section starts off with a producer spotlight that features a small farm in rural Montana. And this farm is working with a small rural school district and selling specifically into their salad bar program. Schools are only one of the farm's marketing outlets, which I like to point out in terms of risk management and diversifying marketing channels. I'm also not sure salad bars are happening within the school districts that you work with this year, But the take-home message in this spotlight focuses on the Van Order's talk about planning for crop successions or crop relays as a tool to make sure the dollars and cents line up to meet their obligations. In other words, making sure they have a consistent supply to meet the school contract. So in slides 27 through 29, we dig into how to use school contracts and agreements to develop a crop plan. As with enterprise or financial planning, production planning is critical in meeting the needs of the school markets. It involves first understanding the needs of the school and then working backwards all the way through the production process in order to figure out the what, when, and how the producer will meet the needs of the school. For example, on my family's farm, we start with the delivery or market date, and then we work backwards to figure out when to harvest, how long a crop is in the field for, when it is seeded or transplanted in the field, where it is planted in the field, when it needs to be started in the greenhouse, and going all the way back to how much seed we need to order and start. As I mentioned a few times already, if it doesn't work on paper pre-season, then chances are it won't work in the field. So that is to say, it pays to plan. And keep in mind that planning also helps manage risks. Crop growers need to plan for things like crop loss, while livestock producers may have challenges associated with processing dates and the impacts this can have on the weight of an animal. All right, so now we're gonna look at a few crop planning tools. And as I mentioned at the start, there's a lot of tools and software out there. But one of them we wanna highlight here is called Ag Decision Maker. And this was developed by Craig Chase at Iowa State University Extension. And this tool is designed for producers to evaluate marketing outlets using whole farm records. And whole farm records are the type of records a farmer needs to keep to file their Schedule F for income taxes. And they can be used to evaluate various marketing outlets, especially when a producer doesn't have detailed crop or enterprise records. So producers can use this spreadsheet to evaluate different market outlets based on their potential contribution to overall farm net income. So the next tool, which I'm much more familiar with, is from Johnny's Selected Seeds. And on their website, they have a grower's library that is filled with several great resources for crop planning. And this is all under the planning and tools and calculators section. So Tammy's going to bring up the calculator and sort of walk you through how to get to it. And then we're going to sort of go over one of the calculators here. Okay, so that's the Johnny's Selected Seeds website. And there's a grower's library. And within that, there are calculators for things like seed starting and transplanting dates, succession planting, and harvest dates. And keep in mind that the harvest dates are the starting point for crop planning and when working backwards to planting and seed starting. So within this, we want to show the succession planting calculator. All right, and we chose this one to showcase because succession planning or having a consistent supply is so critical for selling to schools. And there are sort of two general ways to achieve this. One is through staggering the planting dates of the same variety of a crop, or the other is to choose a different variety of the same crop that has a different date to maturity. So for example, Ace red peppers take 70 days to mature, while Olympus takes 85 days. So we can either stagger our planting of Ace red peppers to meet what we're contracted to work with the school, or we can plant the Ace or the Olympus at the same time, knowing that we're harvesting one at 70 days and the other about 2 weeks after. So in looking at the spreadsheet, there's a couple things to point out, and one of them is on line 30. this is really important, particularly for the Northeast, because it allows for calculations to incorporate or considers a farm's first frost date, which will impact column M in the calculator, which is the final planting date. So if you don't put in the frost date, it's going to assume that there's days beyond which technically a farmer is unable to plant. Based
Why
on
don't you tell me what your last frost date is and I'll put it in here. Your average frost date, and we can show them how that works.
so you can put in, trying to see the calculator here. You could just type in May 13th.
That's okay, yeah, that's right. That's it. Oh, but I'm putting in the fall frost date. What's the first fall frost date that you have?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at trying to see the calculator. You could put in, how about October 15th?
All right. So hopefully everybody can see how that changed the final planting day and the staggering of the different plantings. All right, are we done with this one, Andy?
Sure. Unless anyone has questions. All right. Well, please let me know if you do try this out and run into any problems. I can try and walk you through what some of the components may be. And then we're going to go back to the slides. All right, Tammy, and you can go, there you go. Thank you. All right, so and just finishing up this section, it does conclude with an applied activity on crop planning, and it starts with a bid sheet exercise that is then used to complete a crop plan for one crop. It gives an example of using carrots that starts with the production goal, which would be based off the quantity a school needs for the product, and then shows the process of working backwards to figure out how much to plant and how much space is required in the field. And this is page 42 of the producer workbook. All right, so that is for the crop planning portion. And now we're going to move on to section D, which is the livestock planning portion, which begins on page 93 of the Facilitator Guide. And this section starts with a short applied activity where livestock producers evaluate how their products fit onto the school plate. So this activity is simply a gauge of the room and to hear from producers about their experiences and what products work best for school sales. And then after the applied activity, we start to dive into production planning. So diving into this section, here livestock producers will focus on school menus and in determining portion sizes for their protein products, with the key concepts focusing on versatility and costs. And as Margot discussed previously in module 3, a school's capacity and needs will dictate how much and in what form the livestock product will take. For example, does the school have freezer storage? Then we want producers to think about production planning and to have you folks share some tools for determining production capacity and profitability. So one thing to note is that livestock producers will tell you how important it is to have several months to a year's advance notice of the quantity required to sell to schools. This is critical for scheduling processing dates, which are set far in advance and continuing to be a barrier in the Northeast, as well as throughout the country. So in looking at planning tools for livestock producers, we have here the Compass tools, which are free downloadable spreadsheets. And these were created by the Center for Integrated Agricultural Systems at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. John Hendrickson, some of you may know. So these tools help farmers actively manage for increased farm profits by helping them understand their cost of production, by product, and by market channel. So this enables farmers to make strategic decisions based on data rather than instinct. And so the Compass toolbox includes spreadsheets for veggie production, for livestock production, as well as for organic grains. And slide 38 in this section is the final slide, and it touches on egg production. This is a topic you may want to expand on, depending upon the interests of the producer audience. This is also a great opportunity to consider using examples of local eggs in schools that you can elevate from your state. Many schools use liquid eggs or outside processor manufactured egg products, so the transition to buying local eggs can be challenging. From a producer aspect, adding eggs to an existing farm may not be too hard to implement, and it can provide an additional profit stream, assuming a producer can get their expenses, primarily feed costs, low enough to meet the school's price point. And in this section, there's also a second applied activity on page 96 of your facilitator guide. And this is very similar to the crop production planning activity, but here we're using beef as an example, where it starts with the total amounts needed and then is broken down to pounds per week, number of weeks, and the total number of animals needed to meet the supply. All right, we're cruising. And so our last section is section E in module 4, and this is on food safety. And food safety and a producer's inability to meet school food safety requirements was identified as a top barrier in the needs assessment that I believe Carolyn spoke about on Monday. So we want to start this section off with a forthcoming myth-busting video and a written case study to help illustrate that schools only have an obligation to follow state and federal standards. There's often a lot of confusion around the different types of food safety standards and certifications on the part of producers and buyers as well. So in this section, we focus on the obvious differences between produce safety and meat processing safety. For example, FSMA and GAPS are related to produce safety, while HACCP is related to meat and significant food processing. So we'll talk a little bit more about these here. But starting off with the myth busting video, this is our friend Erica, who you all were introduced to on Monday at Common Ground Farm in New York. And so here we want to share with you what Erica has to say about how the farm works with the school district in their county to come to an understanding on food safety standards. So Tammy is going to play a short clip for you.
I'm getting there, folks. Sorry, just a second. Okay, we're there. Managing so many different screens these days. Okay. Hopefully you all can see that now. Let's get started with Erica.
Different states and different school districts have different food safety requirements depending on their own set of guidelines. We were lucky that in our school district, the Beacon City School District, that they don't require GAP certification. In lieu of that, our food service director was able to come and do a site visit where she worked through a checklist of food safety guidelines and made recommendations based on that to ensure that we had good general practices. Some of the things that she asked was that we exclude animals from our field, which we do with our metal deer fence, and also from our pack shed that has a roof over it. She also asked that we use an organic disinfectant in our wash water and that we stop using wet burlap to cover our crops in the walk-in cooler. So we switched to plastic. We do still use wet burlap on some of our other products that aren't going to the schools because we want to limit our plastic use. But in general, the recommendations that she made improved our overall practices anyway, and it was really good relationship building with her to ensure that there was trust between the food service director and the farmers.
All right, thank you, Tammy, and I'll give you a moment here to bring up the slide deck. All right, thank you, Tammy. So after producers listen to the video about Common Ground Farm, or possibly a state or regional farm that you can share, facilitators should talk about some common food safety requirements. And as a reminder, the School Food Authority may not have specified requirements and may lean on the federal and state food safety requirements. And as you all know, every school is different. So a couple important things to point out here on slides 42 and 43. First is that schools that set specific food safety requirements or vendor qualifications should address these in their solicitations. Second is to remind producers to review any state-specific food safety standards and to be familiar with the federal standards. And finally, this may be a good time to plug opportunities for direct-to-school sales, as some distributors may require food safety certifications, such as GAP certification, which Erica mentioned in the video. So let's take a moment to focus on this. And for the purposes of this training, it would be good to share some of the commonly used acronyms and what they mean for producers that want to sell to schools. If producers understand the differences in these certifications and regulatory programs, it should help them better communicate with school buyers. Thus, this section touches on the different standards and certifications. These include FSMA, or the Food Safety Modernization Act, which is administered by the Food and Drug Administration and not the USDA. And this is mandatory unless you meet one of the exemptions that you need to familiarize yourselves with. And when I say exemptions, it's important to understand that no one is exempt from food safety, but within FSMA, there are exemptions from many of the requirements based off of a total gross sales over a few years, as well as sort of defining who the qualified end user is and where their location is located in reference to the farm. There are also good agricultural practices, or GAPs, which we have mentioned. And this is a voluntary produce safety certification that is verified through an independent auditor. A GAP audit is often required for selling to broadline or some regional distributors. And you may also be aware of Group GAP, which is a USDA farm food safety program that allows farmers, food hubs, and marketing organizations of all sizes to band together and pool resources to achieve GAP certification. So in other words, Group GAP, according to the USDA website, is helping more farmers supply fresh, local produce to institutional markets and providing buyers and consumers alike with more purchasing and product options. We suggest also mentioning HACCP, which stands for Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Point. And this is a procedural system for food processors, including meat, to follow to ensure procedures are in place to avoid people getting sick. There are certifications and training for HACCP, and most folks that are outlining a HACCP plan are required to be federally or state inspected. So having a HACCP plan helps prevent violations. If you are working with primarily crop producers, this slide 46, can be omitted. The same goes for slides 30 through 32 regarding livestock planning. When including this slide, it's important to recognize that most meat producers take their product to a state or USDA processor. I'd like to highlight the ATRA publication shown on your screen titled Working with Your Meat Processor, which provides communication tools to get the cuts of meat that a school might be interested in. And we understand how in-depth food safety trainings can be. So I would suggest that you refer producers to the amazing resources that your state most likely has, and to get familiar with state-based resources. Many of you have extension offices on your team and Produce Safety Alliance certified trainers, so that is great. If not, consider engaging with them to talk about state-based training programs. If those resources are not available in your state, the ATRA program website has a food safety page on it that includes a tutorial, videos, podcasts, and other tools to help producers understand food safety and how to write a food safety plan. I also want to highlight another great school-based food safety resource in both the producer and facilitator. These are in the digging deeper sections. And this is the Oklahoma Farm to School Food Safety page. If you follow the link, hopefully someone could put it in the chat. You'll be able to see that there are a lot of resources for producers on this site. All right, and the applied activity at the end of the food safety section relates to a risk assessment, and this is on page 100 of your facilitator guide. The assessment helps to outline a food safety plan. So you may suggest that producers share the mitigation strategy outlined in this assessment with school buyers. And one thing to note is that this is an online fillable PDF, so it can be emailed or printed off to show school buyers their food safety risk management strategies. This is mainly for crop producers, as livestock producers typically work with their meat processors to ensure food safety protocols are met. As I just mentioned a few slides ago, the ATRA publication, Working with Your Meat Processor, is a great tool to refer your protein producers to. All right, well, we've made it through the sections. And so this is sort of the Cliff Notes version of Module 4, and it's a lot to cover on business, production, and food safety planning. As with all the other modules, trainers should prompt producers to use these assessment questions, which are on page 100, to help frame their next steps and short-term goals in their action plans. The essential questions we want producers to have a basic understanding of after this module are on your screen, and they include having a basic understanding of their break-even price or cost of production for the products they intend to sell to schools, what the weak link on their farm might be that is preventing them from scaling up or being successful for school sales, understanding what resources to access to develop a production plan, and working backwards from the school solicitation. And finally, understanding food safety and how to communicate with buyers about their food safety practices. And so here's a glimpse of the case studies that we feature for this module and who speak well to meeting a price point that works with schools and some of the decision-making processes farmers went through for scaling up for school sales. I believe we went through 3 of them, and there is one listed here, Beef to School from Bear Paw Meats. That's also included that I did not cover in this module. And finally, as sort of to reiterate what Margot mentioned, there are many of the principles discussed in these modules and in Module 4 that are general to all producers. And so there's not a lot of regionalization prompts in the facilitator guide. So we suggest regionalization through producer profiles and to focus on examples of the types of enterprises that are unique to your region for your audience to highlight at your trainings. So you all have made it through the Cliff Notes version of Module 4, and I appreciate your time. I'm happy to take questions, but also note that we are now going to move into sort of a final component of this section, which is actually Appendix C in your facilitator guide, where my colleague Lee is going to talk about Fish to School. So thank you so much. And if you don't have any questions now, please make sure if you do come across any that you reach out, and be happy to help you address your questions.
All right, folks, that was a lot to cover. So any questions in the chat? I'm not seeing any right now. Feel free to put them in the chat or just go off mute and ask away. All right, Andy, other than just a thank you for the great resources. Okay, so Kevin Dawson from Massachusetts says that some states like Massachusetts have their own additional food safety certification processes. So good point, Kevin. Yeah. Okay, we are getting quite a few questions. Okay, so Blair, do you see a lot of producers wanting to get GAP certifications?
I do. Yeah, I mean, it just depends on the buyer and what they're looking for. But I've also seen some interesting situations where producers are allowed to sell into these markets while they're working on GAP certification. So I think that's something to be aware of, that some of these markets will say you have to already be certified to access these markets, while other ones are saying you can actually be working towards your GAP certification while currently selling to these markets as well.
Yeah, great point. Because yeah, GAP is definitely a market-based certification. And Andy Jameson wanted to see if you could dig in a little bit more into the HACCP plans regarding any kinds of lightly processed foods. That like are they required for lightly processed foods? I have not heard that that is the case, but if you're aware of any anything within your region about that.
I have not as well, Tammy, but I'm happy to look into it. But if anyone is aware of this, feel free to unmute yourselves. If not, Jameson, I'll definitely see what I can dig up for lightly processed foods.
Yeah, I guess it depends on what you mean, Jameson, by what lightly processed is. Like, I think there are some variability in terms of definitions.
Yeah, I was thinking specifically for our project, we're making pizzas for the schools. So we'd have a outside vendor that has their, make the dough. And then we would have an outside vendor make the sauce with our tomatoes. And then in our hub, we will build the pizza and deliver it to the school. So there's not flour everywhere, there's not sauce everywhere, but it's still open containers, if you will, and we're handling things. So maybe it's a quick plan that could be rolled out, or I just don't know if we just do it just in case. So we're kind of ahead of the game.
Yeah, that sounds like definitely food like not food processing, but like food manufacturing. And so that definitely, in my mind, would have to follow a HACCP plan. So maybe, I know you're from New Hampshire and Andy is from New Hampshire, so maybe you two can connect and find a place where you can get some HACCP training.
So I have a quick question. This is Blair with the FNS. So Jameson, you guys are doing in-state processing, essentially?
Correct. Yeah. So the dough makers in the state, the tomato processors in state were in New Hampshire too, and the food would stay in New Hampshire.
Okay, and so New Hampshire is responsible for reviewing like their end product data schedules, all of that, their monthly performance reports, all of that information.
I'm guessing I'm also learning too.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
All right,
Yeah,
thanks.
I was just gonna say, I'm happy to follow up, Jameson, with you. But I appreciate what you said of possibly doing it anyways, just to be ahead of the curve. And I think that's really important when it comes to food safety. So whether you fall under some guidelines now or in the future, I think it's always best to pursue those opportunities just to be on the safe side.
Yeah. Thank you.
Great, thanks everybody for the questions. And we often come across questions related to the food safety piece, but we always do want to remind folks that there are a lot of produce safety trainers in your state and lots of resources, state-based resources. So definitely connecting with those state-based resources, especially for this particular section. So with that, we are going to launch into the Fish to Schools, which is just a kind of supplementary training for this particular region, since there are a lot of fishers and lots of opportunities for folks to engage fishers in selling to schools. And Lee, I hope you're on.
Oh yeah, I'm here. Hi,
Oh,
Tammy.
there he is. Yay. Okay, cool. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get going. I'm going to mute myself too.
Cool, thank you.
And maybe you can tell folks a little bit about yourself while I'm sharing my.
Oh, I just might do that. So as Tammy brings up the slides for our next little section, I'll give you a little input into who I am. My name is Lee Reinhardt, and I am an agriculture program specialist with NCAT based out of the Northeast region. And I've been with NCAT for about, I don't know, 12 or 15 years or something. I keep forgetting exactly how long I've been doing this, but I spend a lot of my time doing soil and pasture ecology, and also have an interest in aquaculture, and have done some work within CAT with aquaponics education and aquaculture education, and so whenever we were putting together regional ways to regionalize some of these different trainings, we knew that there were a lot of areas of the country who could really benefit from some type of fish program. And so the purpose of this short section is really just to provide information to your producers, whether they be aquaculturists or fishers, on how they might be able to get started with the conversation and some of the things that they need to think about whenever they're looking at selling their products to schools. And so we will go through, the different slides, kind of like Andy did and like the others have been doing, talking about objectives and what to expect, and some of the different slides and what the main points are, and to basically just give you a sense of what the training is. This can be, you can follow along with this presentation starting on page 123 in your facilitator's guide. Lays out all the talking points for the different slides. And one thing that I really do suggest, if this is an area where you don't have a lot of experience, but you guys are really interested in and you have interest in your participants to serve fish to schools, is to really collaborate with a professional like a state aquaculture coordinator or a Sea Grant extension educator. They can give you an awful lot of assistance in teaching this module. Another good thing to do is think about organizing panels, with school procurement people, with fishers, aquaculture producers, so that you could have a panel with your participants, and as you train them on this fish fish to school opportunity, they can really bring in a lot of good on the ground information and their experiences and what they've had to navigate in order to bring fresh fish and fresh seafood products to the schools, which is a benefit not only to the schools but to the producers as well. So this presentation should take you less than 30 minutes, giving it to your participants, and you could be lengthened certainly by bringing in some extra presenters to kind of give that perspective from the Sea Grant perspective, especially whenever it comes to things like regulations. Waiting around in the regulations of seafood production and seafood sales can be daunting at times, and that's why I really recommend having someone come in to talk about the regulations, because they not only differ from state to state, and you've got national regulations, you've got state, you've got local, even all the way down to the township or the county level, the municipal level, especially when it comes to aquacultural production in state or federal waters. So really having a Sea Grant extension educator can really help out, especially when you come to processing, to regulations and things like that. So so that's just a bit about the learning objectives. Basically, you can really help them to work with schools and introduce their local seafood into the school markets, which is like I said, is really beneficial for both the fishers and for the schools, the kids who are going to be eating it. So these slides here, let's go on, Tammy, to slide number 3, which is considerations for working with schools. Yeah, there you go. So these slides introduce the basic characteristics of the school's needs and options for making a connection. And I think as we talk for the next few minutes about investigating selling seafood to schools, it's going to be a lot about making a connection with the school, because for many schools, bringing in local seafood is not very common at all, and they don't even know what it's going to take in order for them to do that. If it's been tough to bring in vegetables and meat and things to schools, and historically, it can be even tougher to bring in seafood because it's something that a lot of school procurement people just don't even understand. And it's a lot easier to bring in frozen seafood from a distributor. But if we can get local food in this manner, it can really be a benefit. So one of the things about these two slides on the considerations for working with schools is that you need to drive into the minds of your producers that the traditional paradigm in the schools is basically that the menu drives the product. They have a menu, and they're going to be making this menu, and they're going to be getting the products to fill that menu. But a seafood to school program has the possibility to kind of reverse that and turn it around so that product volume can drive the school menus. And this can be a marketing tool for your producers. Thinking in terms of starting out small, offering, once or twice a month, a local offering for lunch can be a way to start having a product volume drive what's on the school's menu, especially if it's really successful with the kids, and if the school has really adapted their kitchens to be able to deal with fresh seafood. One of the ways the schools have to do that is they have to be flexible by keeping ingredients on hand so that they can handle various species and such that are on offer depending upon what the producer brings to the school, using materials on hand for various recipes. And again, communication and marketing and developing a relationship is so important. One of the things that your producers can do is make sure that the school can have access to recipes. Can be a really great way to kind of help the school to keep the things on hand so that they can use the same types of ingredients depending upon what type of species is delivered. Another thing is there's dramatic swings in the wild fish caught market, and this is can really result in a high variability of prices for seafood. And so instead we look to offer the most abundant fish, whether they be an aquaculture, a farm species, or even like an underutilized wild species. And if we combine that with a low fixed price, which is basically the median up and down swings in the fish market, this can result for your producers, more flexible, more consistent income, and then flexible dining for the students. And that's, again, we're always going to talk about the importance for the school as well as for the fish farmers and the fishers. So the first thing to do is to look at what the school is already serving in terms of seafood on the menu. Basically, introducing your participants in the workshop to those opportunities. Are there any opportunities where their locally sourced seafood could substitute for what's on the menu? It's important to know before they go any further that seafood popularity in school meals can be really highly regionally dependent. And so be mindful that there's different levels of seafood acceptance in different regions. So again, starting a conversation with the school food authority on this is going to be pretty important. We talk about menu diversity, especially for fisherfolk who might have lots of underutilized species and bycatch and things that they might get. There's a program in California called Bay to Tray from Real Good Fish, which is an organization that uses underutilized and unfamiliar species and markets them to schools, educating the school staff and the students on these other types of seafood. And here in a little bit, we're going to watch a short 3-minute video about beta tray, and it's an option that you can provide to your in your workshops as well, to kind of show what's going on out there in the world of seafood to school programs. Another thing you can do is just kind of like encourage your participants, again, in establishing that communication, open communication with the school, is to place a catch of the day on the menu a few times a month, or even considering visiting the school classrooms to introduce the students to their livelihood, right, and the product, and that means and what it means to be a fisher and what it means to be a fish farmer who cares for the ocean and natural resources. And it can be a valuable educational opportunity for the students as they hear your story. Again, in small scale marketing for produce, whether it be in school or out, we've all heard that having a good story is really important. And the thing that fish farmers and fisher folk have is they have a good story. And they can really use this to get into the schools and to educate the kids and develop a demand that way. So right now, what we're going to do is, in thinking about telling the story of local fish and farmers and this and that, and how it resonates with people, we're going to watch a short video. I think, Tammy, can you go ahead and pull up the Real Good Fish video? It's about a 3-minute video. It's a case study that you can actually have your participants watch, and then you guys can discuss it and kind of what would work well in your area.
Seafood is one of the healthiest foods that you can eat. It's loaded with omega-3 oils, protein, and all kinds of minerals. And it's a staple protein for billions of people in the world, and it's also a special centerpiece for celebration. Unfortunately, seafood has become a global commodity that produces a tremendous amount of waste and does unnecessary harm to people and the planet. It's become an industry that places value only on profit and not on the health of our communities, our children, or the ocean. At Real Good Fish, we're working to change our broken seafood system to put values like community and stewardship of the ocean back into our seafood. We call it Valueful Seafood. In 2012, we started out by connecting fishermen to local communities through our community-supported fishery. In the course of this work, we learned that school kids rarely have the opportunity to enjoy or learn about local seafood. In school districts like Monterey and Oakland Unified, about 70% of the students qualify for free or reduced meals. This means that many of these children are living at or below the poverty line. Now, public schools only receive $1.25 per student for lunch, including milk. We decided to try to improve this situation by providing local seafood to schools. We source grenadier, which is a mild, flaky white fish caught in the deep canyons of the Monterey Bay. It's the bycatch of the black cod fishery, which is normally thrown back in the water dead and wasted. We realized that there's an opportunity here to take this fish and serve a population in need. And now we buy it from our fishermen partners. We have it filleted locally and are providing a delicious local seafood product that schools can afford and that children love. Our members, they can support the Beta Trade program by choosing to add an additional $1.25 to their share to purchase a fish lunch for public school children and bring fishermen into the classroom. At Real Good Fish, we're working to provide our community with the most valuable seafood in the world, seafood that celebrates all members of our community and all creatures in our ocean.
Okay, thanks, Tammy. Yeah, I appreciate you showing that. I noticed that, let's see, we've got several of you folks online have put in some comments, and so some good resources from Renee. Check out the video and See to School guide for Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts. Partnered up on a few years ago from the National Farm to School Network, also available here. So there are a lot, I mean, come on, this is the Northeast. We've got a lot of good resources, and people, you know, I've got a lot of progressive ideas to get seafood into the schools. Kevin says, we have a seafood vendor in Mass that utilizes small, underutilized fish. Hold on. For schools, works out great because they are perfect size for elementary schools. Now, if you were to look, they were using an underutilized species for beta tray and turning it into fish tacos. You know, there was the amount of work that the school had to do in order to prepare and get that food ready was minimal. They just have to have ovens, and they have to have seasonings and this and that. And so again, that's part, I think, of the conversation that your producers would have with the school about how their product can be brought in to the schools. So we'll go on to the next slide, which is going to talk a little bit about aquaculture and aquaponics. Let's see. There it is. So this one is basically to familiarize your participants with the considerations and logistics for fish farming operations that want to sell to schools. So first thing that they're going to have to do is determine whether or not it's a farm fish operation that they have can actually provide the products at the scale and at the frequency that the school is going to need. It's a lot different than wild caught fisheries, because the fish farm has to be managed, just like Andy was saying, with basically a crop schedule, and you're going to have to be able to have periodic harvests in order to maintain the stocks to the school. So unless your producers are well established and have really good market access, aquaponics and even some aquaculture operations may or may not work here. Typically, most aquaponics operations make money either on the fish section of the operation or on the vegetable section. So if you've got aquaponics producers who are interested in selling to schools, you'll have to look there and see which ones can they produce most consistently and which would provide the highest value for the producer. Since aquaponics has a very high cost of production, if the ultimate goal of your farming operation is an aquaponics farm to school operation, your participants might need to consider where you can get a better price for the fish, perhaps, and then grow leafy greens or something like that and have those sold in schools. So those are the different types of considerations that aquaponics people might need to be taken into consideration. There's an awful lot of resources out there. And again, this is where within the course of your presentation to your producers, if you need, it would be a really good idea to get a Sea Grant extension educator in to talk about things like production schedules for farm fish, how to develop a plan for the required delivery of fish to meet volume and frequency needs. Because for instance, for an aquaculture operation, harvesting can be done either partial or it can be a single batch. And think of that in terms of what's going on with crop planting for vegetables as well. Many aquaculture farmers use a single batch harvesting system, and they have successive ponds or tanks, and then they just kind of rotate those. Partial harvest might be better for feed and growth efficiency for some species, and it allows more regular and better time delivery options. And whereas single batch harvest is often characterized by the ease of harvest and is appropriate where species are not held in the full facility carrying capacity, because the more that the facility is held at full capacity, the less chances you have for really good fish growth, and you can slow down fish growth considerably. So I just mentioned that to suggest that that it's important to discuss crop planning and such with aquacultures to make sure that they can actually meet the needs of the school. The essential question that you can discuss with your producers is whether they can plan for successive harvest during the school season with their particular production system, and offer a quality, regular, consistent delivery of fish to the school kitchen in the process format that's required. There's a lot of logistical things to deal with there. You'll notice on the different pages of your facilitator guide, you're going to have facilitator prompts as well, where you can bring in and talk about different things. For instance, for this slide, the facilitator prompt on your facilitator guide talks about the Oneida Nation operation, and a little case study where they received a farm to school grant from the USDA to include a 4-tank system that holds 70 to 90 tilapia in each tank and produces more than 100 heads of lettuce a week for the nation's schools. So there's lots of different resources out there that you can use in order to use case studies to bring people to points where they can start thinking about, how do I have the type of system or that would meet these needs, or what do I need to do in order to scale up? Like I said, there's a lot of resources. out there to help you guys whenever you're talking to your aquaculturists and your fisher clientele. And one of the best ones that I've seen is the Southern Regional Aquaculture Center, which is a collaboration of Southern state land grants that have put together a series of publications on all aspects of aquaculture production and marketing. And the table here on freshwater aquaculture and aquaponics that we have on our slide came right out of one of those publications. And just to give you a sense of the types of resources that are out there. All these resources are in your facilitator's guide at the end of the section, and I highly recommend that that could be something you could print out and provide to your clientele as well. So let's go on to the next slide. So the next three slides, slides 6 through 8, cover logistics and regulations and processing considerations. Again, consider collaborating with your state aquaculture coordinator, your Sea Grant extension educator for this training, especially for supplying detailed information on the types of permits, and licenses, and regulations that might be needed in your area for selling seafood to schools. These different slides, like slide 6 kind of starts going over the options for delivering fish to schools, and you can discuss with your clientele, different ways to, what they might have available with their processing, whether they process outsourced or if they do it on farm, to deliver fresh or frozen fish to the school, working with a processor, working for a wholesaler, or whatever. Also, it talks about different ways that you can discuss with your producers creative ways to meet the school's price point. The processor that you use can offer portion sizing and freezing and packaging, and selling through a processor or a wholesaler may offer a lower price, but will provide a way more consistent delivery. So these are just some of the things that they'll need to consider. Also, we'll talk about HACCP plans and such. The processor usually holds all the necessary permits, and the plans in order to comply with those state requirements. Also, another thing, we've talked about this before, fishers can couple sales of underutilized species to schools with more prominent species sold to a fish cooperative, a wholesaler, or processor, so where they can get a higher market. What's important to remember is that Americans tend to eat from a very short list of fish species, and these usually include tuna and catfish and salmon and shrimp. But there's a lot more species out there, such as redfish, flounder, dogfish, cobia, shade, sole, hake, and these are just as palatable, and a fish to school program can have the benefit of introducing consumers to new foods that will take the pressure off of overfished species. Again, if you look at the video that we saw from the beta tray, he was really motivated whenever he started his organization. He wanted to make sure that people got good, fresh food. And he also wanted to make sure that fishers had a good income. And he wanted to make sure that the resource was protected. And this has the benefit of doing all of these. You can also introduce your participants to different processors that are out there. A quick Google of regional fish processors will bring up cooperatives, processors, and such. Like, for instance, up here we have Real Good Fish, Talking Fish. We have New Hampshire Community Seafood, Cape Ann Fresh Fish. Lots of education in those web pages on how they're doing things and how fishers might be able to get involved. So slide 7, again, talking about the regulations to ensure food safety for seafood sales. This may be something that you really have to, your producers will have to have a conversation with the food purchasers at the schools to really start to address any issues or fears that they might have about seafood safety and seafood health. Here we're going to be talking about dealer licenses, State Department of Agriculture licenses, aquaculture permits for water use. There's permits for water discharge, for disease control, all kinds of stuff. So again, I can't reiterate enough the importance of having an aquaculture specialist or a Sea Grant educator to come to your training in order to demystify all these aspects to your producers. Okay, so let's go ahead, Tammy, and talk about the next slide. Okay, so this one is on school communications. And this slide really just reiterates some of the main points about communication that we've had before, and it drives home the importance of telling your story and prepares the way for the applied activity that we're going to have next. When you tell your story, you engage the staff of the school and the students, and your participants can establish trust as they gain an understanding of where the food comes from and who produces it. And this will go a long way toward establishing your credibility and developing further opportunities for you guys to sell products to the schools. So basically, you'll be encouraging them to tell the school staff and the students how and why they produce their products. Give them a story, think about ecology and economy, and incorporate this message into the school events. Your story could be place-based and have a face, and that would be the face of the fisher or the aquaculturist. Tell them the story of their farm, of their system, of their family, their boat, their fishing season, and how their products fit into the local economy, and how the ecology is managed well by their practices, because this really resonates with people. Producers can introduce sample menus and get staff buy-in, and help even conduct chef demos and provide free samples, especially for less familiar species, and help develop a signage and such for the school and for the lunchroom, such as the catch of the day species options. We've all heard a lot about telling our story, and I know that as ag educators, we've often emphasize this with our producers, and many of our producers do this in a really good way. I think that with fishers and aquaculturists, it's even that much more important. So let's go to the next slide. This is our applied activity that we have for this optional model. Here, participants will develop a marketing message that would resonate with their customers. And this message should describe and differentiate their operation and explain their philosophy for use as a marketing tool and as talking points when talking to the school food authority or the chef. So you can have your participants take 5 or 10 minutes and jot down their ideas and have a group discussion on the various types of messaging options that the participants can create. And the next slide is just kind of a screenshot of that worksheet. You'll need to print out this worksheet for your participants from page 30 of the Facilitator's Guide. And then the worksheet will walk them through the different talking points to help them develop a message that resonates. And again, we thought this was really important because establishing that really good relationship with the school is going to be extraordinarily important for a new fisher as they come to the schools to sell their products. So let's finish up with the last slide, Tammy. And this is just a little bit about our Digging Deeper section on page 128 in the Facilitator's Guide. Is the Digging Deeper section. And it's got case studies. It's got links to various studies that were included in this short presentation, as well as different publications that you can use as resources for the producers that you're training. As well, there were the references that were used in the development of this training. And I really recommend, since this is not included in the producer's guide, that this page be printed out and provided as a resource to your participants, and make those web links available to them. So that's pretty much it for the Fish to School program. I know that some of you have been putting in some things in the chat. If there's anyone out there today who has any experience with that has any experience in developing Fish to School programs or knows it's successful ones, and wants to share something that wasn't covered, I certainly welcome any comments that you might have at this point.
Renee shared some great resources from Maine, some Maine-based resources, Maine, New Hampshire, and Massachusetts, actually. So, Any other folks willing to kind of come off mute and share some of your experiences with Fish to School?
Maybe it's because there's not a lot of experience out there, and that just kind of drives home the point. You know, it's like if you have people who are interested in doing this, I highly recommend just really establishing a good relationship with your local Sea Grant Extension educator. They can be a great resource for this. So thanks everyone for your time in going through this section with me, and I hope that it serves you well.
Thanks, Lee. Thanks for your time. Okay, before we get into the very last section, the conclusion, we are going to take a 15-minute break. So let's dig into the last module, that conclusion, where you as trainers are going to help producers think through their next steps in selling to schools. Following along with the approach that we've been taking, you can look on page 101 of the Facilitator Guide and page 51 of the Producer Workbook. Like all the other modules, this page in the Facilitator Guide includes a brief overview of the conclusion, the curriculum outline map, and some background information, including digging deeper resources and a link to the slide deck file. The Producer Workbook prompts producers to review their action planning guide and the checklist that they've gone through as they've worked on their action plan throughout the course of the training. So as shown in the curriculum outline that Lacey went over, it's hard to believe it was just yesterday on page 17. This is going to help those of us who are starting to become nearsighted get a glimpse at the sections and the components of the conclusion. So basically, you know, there's just an overview kind of reviewing everything that folks have gone over, the action planning section, and then finally, as you wrap up, including some time for some post-training evaluations. And the materials that you want to think about that you would need to include with the conclusion are that action planning guide that, as a reminder, is in the Producer Workbook on Appendix A, and then a postcard for the final activity. So that's something you would want to have at the ready beforehand. So jumping into the slides, we're now on page 102 of your Facilitator Guide and slides 2 and 3. So up to this point, producers have used their action plan as a tool to identify motivations and goals and immediate next steps. And this has obviously been a thread throughout the entire training, but this is where they'll tie all of their action planning pieces together. This is what we're going to do. So these slides provide an opportunity for you to talk about these next slides on the overview and training recap, provide you an opportunity for you to talk about what you want to get out of the conclusion. Basically, you want producers to finish their action plan and to complete that post-training evaluation. And this may also be a good time to recap the key takeaways and some of the content that they've learned throughout the training. And there are talking points on page 102 for slide 5 that summarize each module, but like all other aspects of this curriculum, you should, just be prepared and adapt these talking points to reflect what you've actually covered in your training. So after the training recap, then you just dive right into the action planning. So slides 7 and 8 really provide some structured time for producers to look over those action plans, make edits, and ask questions. And you might want to do this. You might want to consider doing this through like a small group or whole group sharing. And depending on the size of the group, you just need to decide on what level of support that producers may need, and it just depends. That will dictate how much time you want to spend here. So we encourage trainers to really feel comfortable in building more time here as needed, and just avoid glossing over this section. So, spend some more time to help producers spend some time thinking about their next steps. And this is also an opportunity for producers to articulate what they plan on doing next regarding selling to schools. And it might be a really great time for producers to share that with the group if they feel comfortable. So this final table in the action plan is on page 61 of the producer workbook. And it's the final section of the school business action planning guide. And it really corresponds with slide 9 of your slide deck of the conclusion, and also can be seen, the talking points for this slide can be seen on the facilitator guide on page 103. So as you recall, there's time at the end of each module to review those check-ins that we've been talking about and fill in that action planning table for each module. So the tying it all together table attempts to pull together all of those components that they've been working on in their action plan and what they've learned from the training into one spot. So note here that we have borrowed heavily from the lean canvas principle of business planning. I'm not sure any of you folks are familiar with that, but it can be a tool that is super useful for producers to utilize as they consider a new marketing channel or a new enterprise. So we kind of borrowed from that concept for this tying it all together page or table. And you'll see the table includes a column for producers to identify which market channel that they're considering, whether that be just direct to school, a food hub, or some kind of intermediated market, or a national wholesale distributor. And then choosing one of these doesn't really preclude the others, but you may want to encourage producers to focus on just one. They might have, just a couple of these in mind, but you might want to encourage folks, your producers that you're working with, to just focus on one for the purposes of this process and the lean canvas principle. So the next column, this values pitch column, is kind of what we've already done here as an activity, and presuming you might be doing that same activity with your producers. So they should have this one down pat. So what, asking them to consider what makes their product different or unique, and why should schools be interested in purchasing from them. So the pitch may vary depending on the type of marketing channel that they choose, and you might want to mention that when you're explaining the table. So then these following columns are just kind of the key next steps and key next resources and products and partners that producers need to look into to move forward with selling to schools via that market channel that they've chosen or are working on for this particular table. And if they're still missing gaps and producers are having trouble identifying their market, the products they intend to sell, or those immediate next steps, then you as trainers should encourage them to just go back and review some of the content and some of the stuff they've been filling out in their workbook. And then help them identify some of the important contexts in their state or the region that you're in that can support them with these decisions. And as we'll learn tomorrow, our curriculum team can actually be one of those key resources. So keep that in mind. So for a deeper dive into how to support trainers in using action planning, please, we encourage you all to watch our recorded training because it might be a way to have you explain the action planning concept and the tables that we've developed for this particular project. And we also, in this training, we hear from a couple of farms, Fiery Ginger Farm in California and the Rolling Branch Farms in Georgia. And they talk about how they use informal and formal goal setting and action planning to sell to schools. So that video can be found on the Facilitator resources page. And hopefully that'll get, just as a reminder, get pasted into the chat. Tomas or Lacey, if you could do that, that would be awesome. And then also just the video link will be on YouTube, will be pasted into the chat. So once producers have finalized their action plans, at least for now, and maybe they've shared with the group and filled out that tying it all together table, it's time for that final activity. And we recommend some sort of activity that just celebrates the end of the training and can support producers with holding themselves accountable and also keeps them motivated to follow through on their action plans. So the suggested activity here is for producers actually to send themselves a postcard that won't arrive until a year after the training that you give. And producers will be asked to address a postcard to themselves with a goal or a vision for where they see themselves in a year. And here's the tricky part. So as trainers, you'll collect them and then you need to put them in a place and remember and remind yourself to mail them at that later date. So, and if you have time, you may want to ask producers to share what's on their postcard with the whole group if they feel comfortable. And this activity should probably take like 10 to 15 minutes from start to finish. The instructions for this are at the bottom of page 103 in your facilitator guide, slide 10. But I just want to know in this, in the resource, the slide thumbnail is incorrect. So if you're looking at it and thinking this isn't what is on your screen, but we, just so you know, we're doing another printing and that has been corrected. So I wanted to ask you folks if you have any closing activities that you've used before in your trainings, especially with producers, that have been really salient and worked well for you. Feel free to like unmute yourself. I know we're all getting kind of tired and at the end of our, getting close to the end of this training for the day, but it'd be great if you could put something in the chat or come off mute. All right, hearing nothing, we'll just move on to the next slide then. So lastly, you'll walk producers through that post-training evaluation. And I want to note here that there are actually 2 post-training evaluations for producers. One that occurs right at the end of that training. And then the second which will be sent out 6 to 12 months after the training. And the post-training survey link is listed on the slide and in the facilitator guide on page 104. And you should have received some guidance of how to conduct producer evaluations in a virtual setting. That is actually a resource in your green pocket folder. So I don't want to go too much in depth in this because I'm not super familiar with how we've done the training or the survey, and Lydia will be actually talking about this tomorrow. So with that, it's a wrap on the curriculum, and hopefully the last 2 days have given you a good sense about the curriculum content that we've developed, and hopefully you feel a little bit more prepared to begin adapting the content for your producer audiences. And with that, I'll just take any questions you might have before we go into the next breakout session.
All right, welcome back, folks. So as we come to the close of the day, day 3, just wanted to check back in and give you all an opportunity to share any questions that may be lingering at this point. This could be questions for any of the presenters that have shared their information today, or just questions for us or possibly other attendees here. So feel free to utilize the chat box or come off mute to share your thoughts. All right, then. Well, we're going to be going into day 4 tomorrow. We'll be attending a virtual site visit. We'll have plenty more time to work together as our state training teams begin to form. And then we'll be covering a few other items on our agenda. So we'll look back to see you all here tomorrow. Thanks again for another successful day.